Welcome to Sounds of Resistance channel. The Russian army is dying in Ukraine. The legendary attacks of the Ukrainian army have exhausted the strength of the Russian troops. The weakened Russian army is trying to keep the regions it occupied in Ukraine. However, the decisive offensive of the Ukrainian warriors ensured the recapture of the territories occupied by Russia. Russia is having a hard time standing in the region with the losses in Ukraine. The Ukrainian army, especially in the south of the country, narrowed the Russian soldiers. Ukrainian fighters blockaded the entire southern line of the country. Ukrainian soldiers do not fly birds in the region. Russian leader Putin has been the target of heavy criticism after the defeat by the Ukrainian army. The walls of the Kremlin palace echo with the voices of Putin's resignation. Russian President Putin's failures in Ukraine infuriated the Russian people. Anti-Putin demonstrators turned the streets of Moscow into hell. The main reason Russian activists are angry with Putin is the declaration of mobilization, which involves sending Russian men to war in Ukraine. Opponents of Putin strongly expressed their reactions to the mobilization decision taken by the Russian government. Russian demonstrators began to set fire to recruitment branches all over Russia. With dark in Russia, anti-Putin demonstrators are taking to the streets and throwing Molotov cocktails in their hands, setting fire to many Russian government buildings. While the streets of Russia were boiling like a witch's cauldron, a statement came from the Russian authorities on the issue of mobilization. According to the partial mobilization decree signed by Russian leader President Putin, last September, the Russian Ministry of Defense announced that the process, which envisaged the recruitment of 300,000 reserve soldiers, has been completed. According to the partial mobilization decree signed by Russian President Vladimir Putin on September 21, the process of joining the Russian army of 300,000 reservists has been completed. Reporting to Russian President Vladimir Putin on the completion of the process, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said, since September 21, military commissars, together with the administrative authorities of the Russian Federation, have been carrying out partial mobilization activities within the framework of which it is planned to call and send 300,000 citizens to the troops. After completing their training, 82,000 Russian reserve soldiers were sent to the Special Military Operations Zone, and more than 41,000 of them are acting within the troops. 218,000 Russian soldiers continue their training within the scope of partial mobilization. More than 1,300 public employees and more than 27,000 entrepreneurs were sent to the unions. 13,000 citizens declared their willingness to serve without waiting for summons and were recruited voluntarily. The average age of the people participating in the partial mobilization is 35, he said. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu stated that the enlistment of those who are on compulsory mobilization duty has been completed, but some military branches will continue to receive applications for voluntary military service. Shoigu said the transfer of the citizens called as part of the mobilization to the front has been completed as of today. The process of sending summonses to the citizens has ended. The task of recruiting 300,000 people determined by you has been fulfilled. No additional missions are planned. It will continue to recruit personnel candidates, he said. Speaking after the report presented by Shoigu, Putin thanked the Russian military for their work and said, "I would like to thank everyone who contributed to this great work. You yourself noted that there were some problems and difficulties at the first stage, considering that such studies have not been carried out in our country for a long time. These disruptions were inevitable. However, necessary conclusions must be drawn. Military registration offices need to be modernized," he said. However, he's trying to save the day with the pink lies that the Russian authorities spin among themselves. What happened in Ukraine due to the mobilization of the Russian authorities and what was told are completely different. President Volodymyr Zelensky believes that the recently enlisted Russian soldiers are so poorly trained and equipped that he believes Russia may need a new wave of mobilization soon. Volodymyr Zelensky said that our perception of what is happening at the front with the Russian authorities is completely different. In addition to Zelensky's remarks, Russia is trying to deploy new soldiers to increase the pressure on our positions in Ukraine. But the newly mobilized soldiers are deployed by Russia are poorly prepared and ill-equipped. However, the newly mobilized Russian soldiers have been deployed so brutally by the Russian commands that they have no chance of winning against the Ukrainian army. These developments on the Russian front in Ukraine makes us believe that Russia may need a new wave of people soon, said. Despite the poor performance of the Russian army in Ukraine, President of Ukraine Zelensky does not give up on the precaution. Ukrainians expressed their uneasiness that Russia might take new initiatives to regain supremacy in Ukraine. Iran-made UAVs can be cited as an example of their new pursuits in Russia and Ukraine. Zelensky made a statement on the subject. "We're preparing for the fact that the current Russian leadership will look for new opportunities to continue the war, for example, relying on its accomplices in Iran," Zelensky said. "That's why we work daily with our partners to strengthen our air defense and other defense capabilities. In addition to the Ukrainian leader's statements, every day we strengthen the defense of our critical infrastructure, especially our energy infrastructure." Ukrainian President Zelensky, on one hand, remains cautious against the Russian attacks. On the other hand, he gives new attack orders to the Ukrainian army. The past day in Ukraine, the Ukrainian army detected a movement near Mayorsk in Donetsk Oblast. As a result of the investigation of the Ukrainian army, it was determined in a short time that the activity in the region was caused by the Russian soldiers preparing to attack. The Ukrainian warriors did not allow the Russian soldiers to take action. The Ukrainian army dropped bombs on Russian soldiers near Mayorsk in Donetsk Oblast. As a result of high-precision attacks by the troops of the Ukrainian Defense Forces, a group of 300 invaders was eliminated yesterday in the vicinity of Mayorsk, preparing for a new offensive. The next day, after the attack of the Ukrainian army, about 60 lightly wounded Russian soldiers were hospitalized in Horlivka. The attacks of the Ukrainian army on the Russian front throughout the country continue without slowing down. In the attack carried out by the Ukrainian armed forces in the Chervonopopivka villages of the Luhansk Oblast, nearly 20 Russian soldiers were killed and 30 were injured in various violence. Russian forces had to evacuate wounded soldiers by bus to the city of Voronezh due to the lack of a reliable air ambulance service, the poor preparation of the medical infrastructure in the Belgorod Oblast, and all the local hospitals there were already full. Despite the bad results it has received in Ukraine, the Russian army is not proud of its losses against the Ukrainian army. The Russian army continues to attack the Ukrainian fronts furiously. The Ukrainian armed forces repelled Russian attacks in the vicinity of Vodiane, Kamyanka, and Nevelske, Donetsk Oblast. Russian forces carried out up to 25 airstrikes and 4 missile strikes, as well as over 70 attacks using multiple launch rocket systems, MLRS. More than 35 Ukrainian cities, towns, and villages came under Russian fire, including Siversk and Prechestivka, Donetsk Oblast, Mali, Skerbaki, Zaporizhia Oblast, Davidiv, Brid, and Mala Sedemyunka, Kherson Oblast, and Kobzartsy, Mykolaiv Oblast. Russian army attacks were ineffective in the Volyn and Polisia fronts, and there was no significant change in these areas. The Republic of Belarus continues to assist and support Russia's military aggression against Ukraine. There is an ongoing threat of missile strikes from the territory of Belarus, including the use of offensive UAVs. Ukrainian warriors do not delay in responding to the attacks of the Russian army. Ukrainian aircraft carried out 24 airstrikes on clusters of Russian military personnel, weapons and equipment, and anti-aircraft defense systems. In addition, the Ukrainian Air Defense Forces shut down 2 Russian Su-25 attack jets, as well as 2 Mi-8 helicopters and a UAV. Ukraine's rocket forces and artillery struck the positions of Russian self-propelled artillery systems and other important military targets. No matter how hard the Russian army tries to resist Zelensky's army in Ukraine, the strong attacks of the Ukrainian army break the chains of the Russian army in a short time. It seems that the advance of the Ukrainian army in the occupied territories will continue until there is not a single Russian soldier left in Ukraine. For the Ukrainians, there was light at the end of the tunnel, and this light represents freedom. Thanks for watching us.